Welcome to Therapist Confidential, a psychotherapy.net podcast. And now, here's your host, Travis Heath.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Therapist Confidential podcast. I'm your host, Travis Heath, and today we have Julie Tilsen. Some of you probably know that name if you run in some of the same circles I do, if you're interested in narrative therapy in particular. Julie's been an important voice in the narrative world for a long time. We were talking before the recording, and I think 20 or so years ago was when I first came in contact with Julie's work. I'll say more about that in a minute. But more recently, Julie has written this really great book, Personal Responsibility, Inc., How Psychotherapy Turns Society's Problems into Yours. Okay, if that title doesn't interest you, I don't know what to say. Like an amazing title. And we'll talk, of course, about the book itself, and this idea of how, if we're not careful, psychotherapy can kind of unintentionally reinforce ideas about personal responsibility and other things. And who knows, we may veer off into all sorts of uncharted territory, but I'll tell you, this will be a conversation worth listening to. Julie, it's good to see you again. How are you?
Thanks, Travis. It's really good to put some eyes on you, even if you're not 3D.
Yes, I'm just pixels, but there is something even in pixelated form. It's been great to reconnect with you. Now, for folks who might not be familiar with you and your work, would you mind saying a little bit about who you are and the work you do?
My name's Julie. I say Dr. Tilsen if you're nasty. My pronouns are she, her. In terms of my work, I have kind of an unusual pedigree, I suppose. I have a master's in counseling psychology, but my PhD is in social construction with an emphasis in queer studies and cultural studies. And so a lot of what I've endeavored to do in both my applied work and my scholarship is to bring some of those critical theories and different conceptual resources from queer theory and cultural studies methodologies and things like this, try to make them available, accessible to people that are in applied work, mostly family therapy and youth work. I used to teach in the youth studies program at the University of Minnesota. My previous books, a couple of therapy books about queer theory, and then a youth workbook applying narrative kind of practices to youth work. So that's what a lot of my work is.
Well, and I also know you to be a sports fan.
Yeah.
Especially the teams in Minnesota, yes?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, hockey's my favorite sport. Long time Gopher women's hockey fan. Certainly also a Minnesota Lynx fan.
Which is something that we share, being a sports fan, and I think a love of basketball. Basketball is my number one, hockey's your number one, but, there's definitely some overlap there. Now, I first came in contact with Julie, I think the year we were talking before we started recording, I think it was 2005. I think it was the same conference, for those of you that heard the episode with Makungu Akinyela. I think it was the same conference. And I remember the workshop you were a part of well, because you were talking about doing work with trans folks in 2005. Now, this is vulnerable for me to share. In some ways, I feel sort of embarrassed that I'm saying this, but it's just honest. I had never encountered work at this amount of depth. I mean, to be honest, at that point, I was in my first or second year of a PhD program. I had already done a terminal master's. I had never encountered a workshop, a chapter, nothing on working with trans folks. And then here you are in 2005 in this workshop. And I just remember thinking wow, one, the information, it was just I have so much to learn here. There's this whole area that I haven't even considered, or no one's even asked me to consider it. And then, the sort of courage that it took at that particular time to be discussing such a topic, which I still think it takes courage today, but thankfully more people are discussing it. But all the way back in 2005, do you remember anything about this workshop, Julie?
Well, thank you. And, I did that with Dave Nyland, my BFF. And, maybe there was courage involved, but, I'm a queer cis white woman. Dave's a straight cis white dude. So whatever courage it took for us, we would have recovered from any licks we took from that compared to, trans folks. And since then, there's a lot of people that are talking about working with trans and gender expansive folks. And there's a lot of trans folks that are doing that work and writing and talking about it. So I don't think I realized at the time that it was sort of a big deal, but pushing 100 people in that session, which was unusual for a TC conference, And Dave and I don't know who told us, but I think someone said, they'd never been to any professional, like a therapy conference where that had been talked about. So I think maybe we kind of knew, but we didn't know that it was sort of a new deal.
Before we get into the book, 2 decades basically have passed. What's your sense of where psychotherapy is now and working with trans folks? It's interesting because I feel like sometimes we give ourselves a little too much credit and we think we're very progressive and we've moved a great deal. And then on the other hand, I think we risk sometimes not noticing the important changes that have happened and how we're approaching things. But you've been so close to this now for so long. I'm wondering, what's your current take on the state of psychotherapy's relationship and working with trans folks?
I think you might be giving me a little more credit than I deserve in terms of having a finger on that pulse. Like, I've got some really good friends in addition to Dave and other institutions who do really important and good work researching that. I think particularly in the family therapy community. I think of Katie Hayden Roots at St. Louis University, Kristen Benson at VTech. And then there's like trans folks who are doing the work. Alexian Toffee, who's an independent scholar practitioner, trans person. There's Tiff Sosar, who does a lot of work for Dulwich. They're a non-binary person from Calgary. I guess what I'm aware of is I think there's more scholarly work being done, and there are more trans folks. But to me, like Dave and Kristen, who I just mentioned, and I have a chapter in a what is it, Routledge, it's something about postmodern therapies or something like this. And we wrote a book about queering therapy, and one of the things we talked about was a need for education to be queered. And so I think that might be a place in terms of making space to address trans stuff, but in particular, training trans therapists to me is still probably a big hole. How do we make that available, knowing that trans folks are often economically disenfranchised? There's a lot of safety issues right now. I mean, there always are, but now in particular. So I think that's still a big need, is how do we create safe enough places for trans people who want to be in the field to be able to do that. And I still think maybe like outside of circles that you and I traffic in, there's what I think of as the idea of affirmative care, which to me is a really low bar. It's not very thoughtful, and can be a lot of cheerleading, like going to support a trans person without thinking about the risks that kind of uncritical, unnuanced support can put someone in. So that's my sense more broadly, if that makes any sense.
It makes a ton of sense. One other follow-up on this, which is
Yeah.
interesting to me, is like language is always fascinating to me. And the way that seems like in the modern world, language can take off so quickly. I'm just thinking about where you're from in Minnesota, George Floyd's murder, and then all of a sudden everyone was an anti-racist, or people were proclaiming they're an anti-racist, and the language started to lose. Like, what I was seeing is more people proclaiming that they were anti-racist rather than anti-racist practices actually occurring.
Yeah.
I wonder if something similar is happening with trans-affirmative care, and I'm wondering if you can talk about that sort of label and what you make of the state of affairs with that right now.
Again, I think you might be giving me a little more credit of having my finger on pulses that I don't. So I might just be spitballing here, but yeah, it's that show me the money. Like, if you're going to be a trans ally, comrade, or co-conspirator or whatever, what are you doing? How do you use your cis privilege? I don't know that people always do that. And so I'm not sure what is happening. What I would hope is happening, like, as a cis person, I'm the one that needs to stick my neck out. I'm the one who needs to, if I'm in an organization or an institution, kind of be the flak jacket for trans and non-binary folks around any institutional stuff, in terms of how we're going to practice, how we're going to make it a safe enough place for trans folks or families with trans kids. To me, that's what taking up those practices would be, rather than saying I'm a trans ally. And is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's just like, if everybody is doing trans affirmative care, is anyone doing trans?
Right. And affirming's a low bar. I wrote about this in my Querying Your Therapy Practice book. And it's 5 years old now. But I talked about that. I think there are some more concrete examples in there. But affirming it's a low bar. It's also not necessarily what I'm not sure I want to always be affirming. I'm not sure that's where I want to hang out with folks necessarily. I'm not sure that's very generative. It also doesn't seem very it's not giving people much, and not in terms of what I'm offering, but also I think I can give people more credit than they need my affirmation, right? Yeah, so I think about that in terms of like the language that's used, but if that's the language that's used, then how does that create a barrier to what becomes possible and what the call is for us to step into as clinicians or educators or, neighbors and comrades? Yeah.
Yeah, I could host a whole episode on this, but I want to make sure we chat about this book,
Yeah.
Personal Responsibility Inc., which now I have the actual physical copy, which I've been reading, but I have the digital one as well on my device because I want to be able to underline it and find those when I'm underlining quickly. So I already have it in two different mediums. That should tell you what I genuinely think about this book. But what I'll say quick, Julie, is that this is sort of the book I always wish I would have written. Like, when I read it, I'm like, "Damn, this is so good," and I just have such an affinity for what you're doing, and I guess I wanna start in a very general place because in the book itself, you even say, "Hey, this isn't a book about how to do therapy," and a lot of your other books have been about how to do therapy, which I found really useful. But this one is something different. So I'm wondering if you can just walk us back through sort of the origins of this and where this project started for you.
That's a really good question, and one that I've thought about now that this is done and trying to remember because it's been a while. I've been kind of poking at this for probably a good 4 years. And like a lot of things, it started with me and Dave talking. And I think it started with my noticing both with therapy clients and with supervisees and students how their language was changing around how they described problems or difficulties in their lives and also what they wanted from therapy. And I was like, okay, am I just being an old person and being crabby, like get off my lawn shit? Like, am I just not keeping up? But I was really things like teenagers coming in and wanting a diagnosis. And I'm like, all right, dude, like no self-respecting kid wants that shit, right? So like what's happening, all this fuck, like did it generate from the field or it's generating somewhere else and then the field takes it on? Like triggering and emotional dysregulation. I want to be regulated and my executive functioning. I mean, I think some of that comes from what like neuroscience and cognitive stuff that I don't know anything about. But people talking in these ways. And I'm like, well, this is just weird. And like I was uncomfortable with it and needing to sit with, well, okay, but what are people asking me for? And just grappling with wanting to be super responsive to what are people asking me for with also, but how is what they're asking me for shaped by prevailing discourses and the limits of, the systems we're in and things like this, right? So it emerged from this idea of listening to how people are showing up and what they're asking for, how they're talking about things. And I think one of my weaknesses is I'm often not as, I think I'm better at like on the discursive level and this sort of cultural level and critique than I am up close as a therapist. So I live there. And so for me, I'm hearing, this is capitalism. This is specifically neoliberalism. This is these ideas of myself as a brand and like my brain this, my brain that, like your brain isn't part of you and it's beyond like the Descartesian split of the mind body. It was like that on fucking steroids and I'm like, so what is happening? So that was sort of the impetus was just listening over the last several years to how people are coming in differently in this all this like pressure to optimize. And then in the meantime, it's the world is increasingly figuratively and literally blowing up around us. And in particular for me, my house in Minneapolis, we lived a mile from what is now George Floyd Square, and we were deeply affected by the state murder of George. And my neighborhood is deeply affected. And I started questioning. So I was like up all night on neighborhood watch. And then the next day I'm like meeting with people online, right? And a lot of the people I'm meeting with are some of the organizers and some of the people holding the square and things like this. And so I was super fucked up alongside them. But I'm like, this is messed up. So I was also starting to just question, I've been a therapist for like over 30 years. I'm starting to question, like, is it super helpful to patch? It was like patching people up to go back to war. And I was questioning that and questioning the utility or the meaning of continuing to only work in these kind of private behind doors individual relationships or families way, and thinking, I've done some collective practice stuff, but like, is this a time that's calling for more of that? And then with the murder of George, and then, everything that's transpired since, and being involved with organizing, thinking more about the need for how do I help people be good community members rather than what people were asking for and what the culture of therapy was asking of them to just be good individuals. And I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of threads here, but when I think about where this book came from, it was all these things kind of happening either at the same time or stacking on each other for me.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about neoliberalism, or what you start calling NL for
Yeah.
short, which I like. And this is a term that I think even in like narrative therapy communities, it gets thrown around, but it's often hard to define. Like, we can give aspects of it, but it can be hard to define, even for people who are using the term all the time. One thing that you talked about in your book that I think starts to get at some of what I understand NL or neoliberalism to be is, you talk about how psychotherapy can unintentionally, and I think that part's important, turn social problems into personal ones, right? And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about that, how you've noticed how therapy can turn what are actually fundamentally social problems into personal ones.
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna say that to the person that probably does this as well or better than anybody I know.
Come on, Julie.
Come on now, yeah, I know. No, but for real, I mean, when we sit down with an individual or even a family, so many of our models or approaches, it obfuscates larger context, and it obscures systems. And so, we traffic in ideas of personal choice and decision making and things like this, as if everybody has access to the same choices and decisions, as if there aren't always a million things pressing us and limiting the decisions that are available to us. And they're unfair forced choices, right? In terms of where we spend our limited time, energy, money. And so in therapy, often I think we can get into this kind of, like I said, how do we kind of patch people back up to be somehow a good cog in this system, whether it's a consumer laborer or a student sitting at a desk cranking out worksheets, how to be functioning in these norms, like being regulated, being these sorts of things, whereas it's ignoring whether it's our bodies, our emotions. These are all, we're tamping down or turning off or disregarding what I think of as our own alert systems that are telling us something, that we're responding to things. And rather than attending to what are we responding to, and, as narrative-ish therapists we think of that double listening, the absent but implicit, and response-based practices that if we're helping people, and I say this as someone who does restorative yoga and breathing practices, it's not that they're bad, but when we only do that and we uncritically only do that, it's not fair, and it creates this burden of individualism. I feel like I've strayed from your question.
I think you're on the track of the question very much so. And it's interesting. I love that you said, "Hey, I do some of these practices too," because the problem isn't necessarily with the practices themselves. I mean, breathing practices or yoga can be really lovely, but if it's being done under this idea that the person must do this to help regulate themselves so they can return to the battlefield of neoliberalism
Yeah.
and like capitalism. Well, now we start to maybe have a problem, and but it's not seen as a problem, right? It's like, oh, you're engaging in these wonderful self-care things to help you sort of meet the moment of your life. And so not only is it not scrutinized, but it's often seen as like a good thing to be doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the end point rather than, if this is preparing me for something or helping me have capacity or be able to show up to something, what am I showing up to? And I think that's a question I'm asking in the book. What if we are showing up to each other? What if we're showing up to climate change? What if we're showing up for trans folks rather than showing up just for myself? Because I think that's the other project pressure assumption in a neoliberal culture. And then therapists, we just assume that's what we do too. And so it's not that these things aren't helpful. A very smart friend of mine, Jen Sampson, who's a family therapist in Washington State, talks about, she said in response to this, something like, it's not that coping is bad, but what is it we're learning to cope for? And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at too. And so I would say that the language of coping is something that I don't use, and that I would say something about. But the spirit of what she said is very much in alignment of what I'm talking about too, is asking a different question about what are we trying to get our shit together for? That's what being regulated is. But I think being, emotionally regulated is also keeping the status quo happy. There are certain people that are women, people of color. These folks are supposed to be regulated. Certain people have the privilege, particularly when it's around anger, don't have to regulate, right? So those are some of the things that, there's lots of ways we can understand it. I chose to understand it through the lens of neoliberalism.
Yeah, and just even in the title, this idea of personal responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Personal Responsibility Inc. Love that. And personal responsibility is something as a human being and also as a therapist, maybe a narrative therapist, but I don't know. Some people will say, well, you're not a real narrative therapist, or some people will say you're not a therapist at all. And I'm finding more and more when people say that to me, I'm taking that as a compliment. I don't think it's meant as a compliment, but
Yeah,
it's sort of like, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. But this idea of personal responsibility is something I've been wrestling with for some time in a lot of different ways, because in general, the way, as I dig deeper, I see most responsibilities as being more than personal. And so there could be exceptions. Of course, someone will find that like one thing. Okay. But in general, I'm usually seeing most responsibilities as being more than personal. And so if that then makes responsibility at some level social, yet, as a therapist, I feel this pressure sometimes because, gosh, what I'm supposed to be doing is working with the individual. I'm supposed to help them stay regulated, whatever it is, right? And so there's this real tension between, I don't see most responsibilities as being solely personal, yet the field I'm in seems to think differently. And I'm wondering if you can talk, maybe you've experienced some of that tension, maybe it even informed part of what you were writing, but I'm wondering if you can speak about your understanding.
Yeah, 100%. And I think years ago, a 7-year-old said to me, "You're not a therapist, you're an untherapist."
I'd put that on my business card.
Yeah, you just had me remember that. I haven't thought about that for a while, but your story made me. I think that's 100% right about, it's like, who and what are we responsible for? There's nothing wrong with personal responsibility or, accountability. But I think we've been so socialized, trained more recently, especially. It's like we're a brand. Our body is commodified. We talk, people even say my brand, and they kind of say it like jokingly or whimsically, but that's what we're doing. And so when you're so focused that way, how are you ever going to think about others and other things that matter? And so I think it is about rethinking, reimagining, who and what do I want to be responsible for or to? And also who's responsible to me? How are we responsible, co-responsible or something? Challenging this idea, because that was another troubling. I think when you your first question about some of the origins or impetus for the book,
Yeah.
when I'm thinking about some of those first months after the murder of George Floyd and sitting online with one constituency of my clientele was self-proclaimed and generally nice, progressive, white, South Side Minneapolis people, horrified at what happened, but never having to really show up to stuff and not knowing how, not knowing where to go to be part of organizing, where to go to support things. And like, I could list things off, we'll drop some wood off at the square, or there's Supply Depot needs stuff, all these different activist and organizer formations that, I had more relationship with, and people not knowing what to do and struggling with that. And so that was this question I saw people grappling with. On one hand, okay, I just need to take care of myself. I'm horrified by what's happening. I'm not feeling right. I'm emotionally dysregulated, but also like this little guilt on their shoulder. But how do I live into a value that that I think was there, but they didn't know how to do it. And so that was another impetus for the book in terms of in those conversations, fumbling around with people and trying to offer or fumble our way into a different question of responsibility to who or what. You have these aspirations, these values. This is a moment you're called to, I understand you don't concretely know what to do, but let's look at, what's this grappling with? Do I just put my head down and take care of my own shit? Or what's this thing whispering on your shoulder about, hey, this is that thing you've been waiting for to show up to or something. So I think that was another impetus.
I love you kind of, as we were talking, introduced this idea of like co-responsibility.
Yeah, I just made that up.
I really like it. And I think it captures some of what I was reading in the book and also just some of what I've encountered in the world. And it's interesting because often the people that are yelling at us to take personal responsibility don't seem too keen on taking it themselves. So it's this way they want others to take personal responsibility, right? Which
Yeah, I'd say
Go
that's
ahead.
the definition of neoliberalism, because the others I'm imagining you're thinking about, Travis, are people with a lot of power and authority and money. And so, like, this is maybe a silly example, but every time I go drop a pop can or a toilet paper roll into my recycling bin, and if one doesn't make it, it's not my fault that we didn't recycle a pop can, that the world's on fire. And so, right, those stories of what we're supposed to individually do. I drove my car one day instead of taking the bus. It's not my fault that the wildfire smoke is keeping all of us from enjoying the outdoors because I drove my car that one time instead of taking the bus or riding my bike. And so when you say that, that's what I think about. And I think that's absolutely neoliberalism creates a lot of these problems, and then we as therapists can unwittingly function to support them by encouraging people to be their best selves and optimize and regulate and all these sorts of things, because then we're not out there saying, wait a minute, it's not this pop can that I threw in the garbage instead of, I put it in the black bin instead of the blue bin. Sorry.
Yeah, I've appreciated how you're dropping this lingo too, because a lot of this now, hey, it's still manifested through other language and in other ways. Neoliberalism is not new, but there's this specific version of neoliberalism. And I don't know why COVID's always like the point of demarcation. Maybe it was happening before COVID. I notice it more after COVID, but like, be your best self. Yeah, I hear so much of that. Or you were alluding to this earlier, that people come to see therapists, they come to see us, and they already have a diagnosis in hand. And not just a potential like they're sure of it, right? And it's like, people blame this on the TikTokification of mental health and all that, which I don't necessarily think is all bad. It's good that people are talking about some of these things. The way some of it's manifesting, I worry about that too. But I think blaming social media for this is to miss the larger picture of neoliberalism. But yeah, this kind of lingo, the way people come in with diagnoses, my friends and colleagues, Tom Carlson and Sunny Palyaka, say, we're living in the time of the unstory, which I
Yeah.
find really nice. Well, it's disturbing, but it's really nice for me to understand what might be happening, where people come in and say, I have ADHD or whatever it is, right? It's not a story. It's just a label, right? Or I need to optimize. And gosh, there are all sorts of stories behind these, right? A lot of them cultural stories, a lot of them driven by neoliberalism, but they've just become accepted as not only what good human beings should be doing, but also what good therapists should be helping human beings do, if that makes sense. And I'm wondering, as you were writing this book, did you get any sense of how to begin to invite therapists out of unwittingly supporting these practices? Because I even find it hard. Look, I think I'm relatively in tune with these ideas of neoliberalism, and I can be 20 minutes into a session and have a thought to myself like, I'm wondering if I'm supporting this live your best life shit right now, So it's in the water supply, right? But I'm interested in practices that might make us become more aware and do something different.
Yeah. So, a couple of things I talk about. One is, for me, there's a tension around that people come in with diagnostic therapy adjacent language, because I'm very much about, and I write about this, that I think people should know these things, and I want them to tool themselves with that stuff to be able to go toe to toe with a physician or a therapist or whatever, to understand that stuff. And part of understanding that so that they can advocate for their care or what's going on or for their child is also understanding when we're talking about, DSM diagnoses and these things is these are stories made up, right? So that, the entire critique of diagnoses, and everything so that you can understand it and be able to traffic in that language so that you have some agency in your care with a professional. But it doesn't mean you have to believe it. And part of trafficking in that is understanding its limitations, where it comes from, and the politics of it. So I would say that. And then more to your question around some of the things, one of the things I do this, I often don't want to have a script or a rote practice. And I think a lot of us do have certain questions or a version of a certain question that is a go-to for good reason. And for me, I'll say to folks, hey, if they come in, and often depressed and anxious because, who fucking isn't right now? Whatever that means, right? But whether it's that or I'm ADHD or I'm autistic or whatever, I will say that's language that's super available and super popular. And I want to know, I'm not questioning you. So I front load it a lot. I try to, a lot of, and I'm earnest about this. I mean it. Just a lot of care. I'm not trying to talk you out of it or question it. But if you could pretend you've never heard that term before, or that word or that phrase, can you describe for me, like, what's going on? What does it get you thinking, feeling? Is it is it something in your body? Is it a way you think of yourself? What does it get you to do? What does it keep you from doing? Just what is it you're experiencing? Tell me the story. Or is there someone else that has a perspective? Something like that, so that I can try to invite what we might call, an experience near and a richer story, but something free of that label. And I tell them, that's cool if you want to use that, but can you for a minute pretend you don't know it? And so that's one thing I do to start try to invite a more contextual, situated, richer story. And then I might just ask him, what does this term or this diagnosis make possible for you? What difference has it made? Is there anything that it doesn't do for you? Like, what doesn't it say about you or something? So those are a couple. I don't think those are super unusual or fancy things.
No, Julie, I was going to say maybe for those of us who have been practicing in particular ways, maybe they seem sort of smaller, but gosh, I'm thinking for folks who may not have been practicing in these ways, those questions could be really useful. I mean, we may have used questions like these for a year. Like you said, they're maybe not scripted. There could be little derivatives of them, but I think a lot of times we take language for granted as therapists. Somebody says, someone gives a label about themselves and we don't inquire about that label, right? And what you just gave us is a way of doing that, and a way of doing that in good faith. It's not like oh yeah, you have that diagnosis, whatever. No, like, okay, I hear you saying that you identify with that.
Yeah.
And now let's actually explore it. Let's explore the ins and outs of it. How does it serve you? How does it not serve you? I think as therapists, we could stand to do that with almost anything that neoliberalism brings to our doorstep. And actually, I found the act of doing that, just
Yeah.
that exploration, can be useful in itself in bringing us something that maybe we didn't have before. So I get where you're saying, like, well, it's kind of a little thing, but I actually think it could be a lot bigger than it appears on the
Yeah.
surface, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, thank you, Travis. And I think you're speaking to it or implicating it is that, and I do write about this in the book. These have become identities. They're not just a thing that people are grappling with, or maybe strategically need to leverage because that's access in the system, whether it's care or accommodations, which is a whole nother problem and a whole nother sign of. For me, this is a neoliberalism partnering with the medicalization of human experience, and in
Mm.
particular, struggle and despair. That it's been medicalized, so then we need to kinda piece it out and tinker with it, and so practices become super technocratic that way. And so a lot of it too is wondering with people about if they've been on a search for a place to belong. When I think about finding identity, it's belonging, so what's disbelonged them? And what is it about this particular diagnosis or way of talking about an experience that helps them connect with others or feel like there's an identity? So those are places I start too. And I think even just doing that I'm not participating with neoliberalism just to spend some more time. And what I find a lot is some version of a story where, in a sense, neoliberalism has convinced people that they can't handle some hard stuff and that they want to hurry up and not have it be hard, because being hard is a sign of failure rather than, to me, it's a sign of humanity, and particularly at this political moment when things are enormously painful and difficult and scary. So we'll often talk about, like, I think about in Minnesota, we get thunderstorms and tornadoes and stuff. And, there's a tornado warning system. And if there's a severe weather, then there's a million around the city, like every few blocks or miles or so, you'll hear more than one. And one time a client was telling me, they come in and they tell me, I'm dysregulated, I need to regulate. And I'm like, well, I do the whole, if you didn't have that word kind of thing, can you tell me what's going on? And they said, well, it's like my body's buzzing. And I said, buzzing, okay. And I'm like, buzzing like an alarm clock, buzzing like a what, and they're like, yeah, like an alarm clock. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so then we start you kind of talking like, well, what does an alarm clock do? And what are other kinds of alarms? And so, this sort of metaphor. And so we had just had a thunderstorm where the things had gone, the alarms had gone off a couple nights ago. And they said, yeah, it's like a big, like the warning system. And I'm like, okay. So we unfolded this whole kind of metaphorical thing. Like, well, what is the purpose of the warning system? And then at some point they're like, okay, I get it. And sort of like, it's working. So then it's like, it shifted from there's something wrong with me, my body's buzzing, to what are you responding to? And for them, it was like the terrible pressure at work, never having enough time or space to think so that they could do the job they wanted to do. And then, and so it was sort of like, we didn't really even have to, in this case, didn't really have to go there. They kind of got it. And they're like, oh, it's working. I said, yeah, it's working. And the other thing that we sort of then had a little bit of a side conversation is often these weather alarms, it's almost become sort of a joke. Like when I was a kid growing up, if the alarm went off, you grabbed some water and your dog and a box of crackers and a flashlight and a radio, and you went in the basement and you didn't screw around. Now it's like these alarms are going off all the time. And then the weather will pass and nothing's happened. So I was like, well, what do you do when that alarm's going off and you're wondering, like, it looks like the sky is blue, but why am I hearing it? And it sounds like it's coming from the north side, but I'm here south. And they're like, well, I go stand out in the porch and I yell across the fence to my neighbor, or we get onto the neighborhood signal chat and say, hey, what's everybody know about the weather? I said, oh, so you check in with others. Yeah. Okay. And you kind of collectively make a decision. Should we be in our basements? And then it's also like, who doesn't, people in the apartment building, let's check on that. So we sort of had this metaphorical conversation about that. And for them, they sort of got it.
What a lovely story. And it really, to me, hits at the heart of the book that you've written, which is, okay, we could accept the verbiage regulate. Okay, just go regulate. But God, and hey, sometimes there could be something useful for a person that comes out of that. I get that. But think about all the rich material we would have missed. And most of that rich material that you were just talking about has to do with some sort of connection to another.
Yeah.
It's not just to the self. Whereas to regulate, usually, there's some exceptions, but usually it is at least in our culture, is a responsibility of the individual person. You need to go regulate yourself. And you sort of introduce in that story, no, there's something social that's happening. There's something in connection with other people. And often that in itself has an important effect for people, a quote unquote therapeutic effect. So gosh, I just really love that story because I think it gets at the heart of it. And I think sometimes when people think about doing this work, understandably, it sounds so overwhelming because it's like we're fighting these huge systems. And I've even had therapists who might have thoughts sort of similar to the ones I have, beliefs similar to the ones I have about the world. And they'll be like, yeah, that's all great, but I'm working with this individual person. How the hell am I supposed to take on this whole system?
Right.
Now, I'll let you say something about that too. But even in the example you gave, I think that's an example of how we can start to sort of subvert these systems. But I wonder what you might say to folks, because I'm sure you've heard this as well, Julie, when they're like, okay, great. Like, I believe sort of theoretically what you're talking about, but how the hell are we supposed to take on these huge systems?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of a couple of things. One of them, and I wrote about this in this in the book is this idea of only focusing on what we can control. And I think in the book I use a vignette with a supervisee of mine around that. And I think that part of it then is what's a different kind of frame or approach than control. For me, rather than focusing on control, what matters to person, what are their values, things like this. And that's a different conversation. And I also think about the technocratic and the like quantification that neoliberalism requires us. So when we go from control to like talking about what matters with people, then we're freed up from that. And then we talk about narrative, small but significant, then it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. And we're not evaluating or valuing what people do based on outcomes only, but on what it says about what matters to them. And that's a different conversation. And that, when I think about what I was mentioning earlier, kind of one constituency of folks I was seeing for a while right after George Floyd was murdered by Minneapolis police were, progressive white folks who were trying to do something, and they would get really caught up in that all or nothing
Mm,
of huge system change or nothing.
yes.
And so that is one way I try to invite people to grapple with that.
Yeah, I love that. It's all or nothing I'm usually suspect of, just when in general, when I hear it. Now, there are times for all or nothing, but I'm usually suspect of that as I'm listening to people talk. And I'm drawn to the work of Rebecca Solnit here. I don't know if you've read some of her work, but when she talks about hope, and is interesting because she says, look, the folks and COVID's a great example of this. You'd have folks who were like, hey, in 2020, by the summer of 2020, this thing's going to be gone. We're all going to be better. We're going to have a great summer. And I'd have people I'm in conversation with saying this. And internally, I'd be like, this isn't in my area of expertise, but I don't think that's going to be true based on people smarter than me, what they're saying about this. And then you'd have people on the other side who would be like, we're all going to die. We're all screwed. It's all over. Just give up. Right. And what she points out is that in situations like this, both of those folks have certainty, right? The folks who say, hey, it's all going to be great. They have certainty that it's going to be great. Oh, I can sort of rest because it's going to, and these other people are like, well, we're all going to die anyway, so who cares? There's certainty. And what's interesting that what she says is that the certainty sort of exists in that in-between space, right? In a weird way, because when we don't know what is going to happen, there's actually the potential for hope.
That's right. Yeah. It's like something I say to my supervisees a lot is, I don't want you to be certain. I want you to have confidence. I want to foster confidence in you. But and that's depending on my relationship with them, if I smell you being certain, I'm gonna like kick your booty a little bit, right? Because the uncertainty is also, or liminality. There's a generativity. There's a possibility in that. But in what I would find, back to that example, is in either of those camps, people don't really do anything. Yet they're
Yes.
grappling with, something on their shoulder, whispering, "Hey, let's do something." And that's their values or ethics or intentions, but they get caught up in but what will it do? What difference will it make? And for me, it's not so much that always, but like, what does it say about what matters to you and what matters, and things like that.
You keep bringing this up, and I'm really interested in it. This idea of trying to tap into what matters to people.
Yeah.
I've heard you say that 4 or 5 times. It seems really central to what you're doing. I think I have an idea, but I'm wondering if you can put some words to why that's important.
Yeah. Well, I think particularly under neoliberalism, people's values and ethics and aspirations, get really lost as they're just trying to stay on the freaking hamster wheel and count their steps and their breaths. And for me, it's just, God, maybe it's because it's the water I'm in. It's hard for me to pull out the drops and describe them. Conversations about values and like what Bill Madsen would say, mattering. There's so many more conversational pathways, and they're often ones that we don't even take people to in therapy these days, or we don't suggest as a place to walk with them. And neoliberalism has fully put all value on productivity and extraction and things like this. And so I'm trying to invite conversations or listen for those places where people, they may not have the words for it or they may not know it till I ask about it, that they have things that matter to them, but we're moving so fast and there's so much to keep up with. And I think the speed of everything has a lot to do with it. People lose sight of what matters to them. They just need someone to put a sandbag in their lap so they're in the chair for a minute and remember it. It's like people forget what to remember in these times.
I love that. All right, I want to end by challenging us a little bit because, we tend to be fairly similar in how we're thinking about things, and our practices have some real distinct similarities. But I want to challenge the two of us in closing here because I've had this same thought, and I wonder if you do too. Where like I finish a book and I go on a podcast and I talk about it, and then someone will say, "Well, your book's on Amazon. What you're critiquing neoliberal late capitalism, and you're selling it. Are you giving it away for free?" But these are fair critiques, and I think we exist in the same system. And so I know how I respond to that. I'm curious how you might respond to someone who's listening to this, Julie, and they're going, "Oh yeah, but you have this book to sell. Aren't you part of this neoliberal thing?"
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that is the thing. It's really it's hard to escape. We can never rise above, or we can't live outside a culture until we explode it and create a new world. And I think for me, the challenge is, how do I stay as intentional and aware of it as possible? How can I engage with it critically? I don't have control over the fact that my books are on Amazon, but I always tell people, yeah, kind of rather you don't. And so what I think of is, yeah, we're all in this. And so how do we keep imagining and grappling and struggling together to find our way out of it, to create another world? I don't know, man. What's your answer?
Well, I know one other part of how you answer this just because I've been privy to this in the past. I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but
Yeah.
you would donate royalties.
100%. Yeah, yeah. My queer and near therapy practice book, I send my royalties to agencies that serve queer and trans youth. Yeah.
So there you go, right? So that's another action that you're taking.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that I respond is somewhat similar and it's imperfect, but I'll say, look, the best that I can do right now, and I'm just speaking for me for a moment, maybe other people can do better or they figured out how to do better. But the best I know how to do right now is to try to form the most preferred relationship I can with these systems, which in some ways often means trying to subvert them, right? It doesn't mean it's harmonious. It's often not harmonious, right? But the best that I can do is continually look at these systems and try to form the most preferred relationship possible. Sometimes that involves money. Like if I'm speaking somewhere, I'll ask, people will go, "What's your fee?" Which is interesting because it gets to self as brand. And when they say, "What's your fee?" I'll say, "Well, I'm not for sale." And I'll say, I am, I think what you're asking is that you'd like to recognize my work by paying me money, which is how we often do that in the culture. And I appreciate that, but I don't have a fee. What I try to do is work within the agency's budget. And some people, maybe they can pay me $20, $50, $100. And for them, that might be more money than some big conference. If they'll say, "I'll pay you $5,000 or 10,000. That might actually be less of their total budget. And then also having conversations about, hey, what are you paying other folks here? Are we okay, so I'm going to be the keynote on the first day. Are we distributing this evenly among other folks that are speaking as well? And so trying to have those kinds of conversations. Now, does that get me outside of neoliberal late capitalism? No. Same thing in my practice, working on a radical sliding fee scale based on ability to pay. That's what I do in my practice. Now, also, I have a university job that gives me health which is crazy that we have to have benefits that ensure we get medical care, but here we are. So I have a job that has that and pays me a salary. So thereby I have more privilege in that regard, and it makes it easier for me to work on a radical So all these things are connected, but what I can try to do is be in the best relationship possible. When I say best relationship, I mean in terms for me with these systems. So that's how I answer it. I'm wondering how you might reflect on my response.
Yeah, 100%. I do all that too. When I'm asked to come in and train or consult an agency, I ask them about, what their budget, what can they do. I have a sliding fee scale. I've always had a partner who holds it on a job and has health benefits that allows me to run around and do these things. I often present like with youth and I pay them. It's those sorts of things. And yeah, and we also need to earn a living too. And so it's like there's constant contradictions and tensions in this system. And it's like, how can you find a way to leverage whatever particular privileges we have, work with people, and then sometimes you say no if you can't do it within your ethical system, right? I'd be saying yes all the time, right? And then sometimes I can't do a thing. And then I send them to the more rad, more queer, more trans person or something like that. And that's another way I do it too. Is, who's better positioned to do this? I'm an old white lady. I don't think a lot of people need to hear from me all that much anymore. So
I appreciate the spirit of where that comment comes from. And also, I'm so glad we've gotten to hear from you. I think after your last book, the Queering Therapy book, you had told me you were done writing books. That's what I remember. And now we have Personal Responsibility Inc. that's come out. Are you actually done? It's hard for me to imagine you, Julie, being done writing books, but maybe you are.
I don't know, man. I'm tired.
Oh, I love that answer. I'm tired. Yeah, it's so simple, and yet it's sort of also is situated in everything we've been talking about today. I'll tell you this, I'm really glad you wrote this one. It feels different than your other works. I enjoyed reading it. I'd encourage people, if you are this sort of contradiction that Julie and I were just discussing, if you find yourself caught in that and you want to look at your own therapy practice and think about it a little more, I would read this book as well, because it might introduce you to some of the culture of therapy that you don't realize is sort of behind the curtain. And so what I love about this book is therapists will get a lot out of it. Psychotherapy clients will get a lot out of it, and just people who are interested in sort of society and where it's trending and, what are the impacts of that will get a lot out of it too. So I am so appreciative that you would take the time to come on, more appreciative that you wrote this book. I really appreciate all you do, Julie.
Thank you, Travis. That means a lot from you. Thank you.
And let this not be our last conversation. Let's chat again soon.
100%.